All right, we have sound on. I'm just going to let it run for a little bit just to make sure you all can hear me. And then we'll get right in. We'll get right into our lesson. We are in 2 Samuel, 2 Samuel chapter 14, 2 Samuel chapter 14. And we are going to start off like we always do, just kind of giving an overview. So if this is your first time here, welcome to the Her Royal Roots YouTube channel. And we are going through a series in 2 Samuel. We began in 1 Samuel. So if you want to take some time and catch up with us as we're going through this series, you can begin in 1 Samuel. And all those videos are in a playlist. You can start there. But we are currently in 2 Samuel 14. Last week was a very, very heavy week. And so we did have a discussion on Patreon. I don't know if anybody's asked or emailed, but just to cover those bases, that information was not recorded. So if you watch the video later, it was live and it was a great time of healing. So thank you all who came onto Patreon, who discussed with us. Thank you to our social workers and therapists who are trained not only in Torah, but also in their respective fields, who joined in on those sessions and helped us to be able to mitigate the process of healing for those who had experienced trauma or were triggered by last week's lesson. So I appreciate you all very much. This week, we're going to cover our topic as we do every week. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the overview of what happened. And I'm going to kind of deviate this week from my usual flow where we kind of progressively work through the text. I'm going to give you some kind of spoiler alerts in the beginning. We're going to go through some Hebrew words, at least one in the beginning, so that we have a direction and a drive for what we're going to cover today. And so the title of this lesson is Kiss the Sun. And we're going to look at David, Absalom, the after effects of the rape of Tamar by Amnon, and then the killing of the killing of Amnon by Absalom, and then Absalom fleeing to the land of Geshur. I'm going to show you guys some maps just to kind of put everything we talked about last week into perspective. We spent a lot of time dealing with, the trauma of the incident with Amnon and Tamar. And this week, we're going to kind of come back in and kind of look at where things are, where people are, and what are the after effects and the aftermath of how that situation was handled. So you guys are definitely going to need some pencil, paper, or something this week, because I will be sharing quite a few verses. We're going to grab those cultural nuggets. As we've been going through 2 Samuel and, of course, 1 Samuel, what we've been finding is a lot of our questions are answered as we travel through the text. A lot of people are used to traditional topical studies where we pick a topic and then we address that topic. But the beauty of going through the Bible is that the topics are addressed in context, and we get a better understanding of how to apply that information to our day-to-day lives as Hebrews. As we are rebuilding our culture and rebuilding the way that we should live and interact with one another, it is beautiful to see the interactions of our ancestors with the people around during their time, and also, sadly, their failures, because it shows us the heart of Yah and how to get back into right relationship with him as a nation that has fallen very far away and are living in the land of their captivity. So let's start with our definitions. I'm going to share my whiteboard and I'm going to write out this information for you. And the first word that we're going to look at least in the beginning of the lesson, is the word for judgment. It is a theme in this particular text, and it's also a reoccurring theme throughout the scripture, where we get to see our judges, or those who are judging, overseeing the interactions of our nation. A lot of the conversation we had concerning the issue of Tamar and Amnon was, what is the judgment? What should be done in a situation of that sort? What should that have yielded, at least for her sake, or against Amnon? And so what we did was we looked at the situation with Absalom. And a lot of us, felt relieved for what Absalom did, but was it done under proper judgment? Was it done under proper protocol? Was it done in the correct way and in the correct fashion? Well, we can't determine that, and we can't, as bystanders to the text in the future of that time, in this present time, and sit in the judgment seat if we don't know what judgment is and how judgment is supposed to be carried out. What I want to do in this process is to set our lens correct as it pertains to judgment, especially Yah's judgment, and how it's executed within Israel and toward Israel's enemies. So the Hebrew word, the root word for the word judgment, is shafat. Shin, pei, tet, shapat or shafat. And it is a function that is used to create order and harmony. This regulates, and it's one who champions for one's rights. And so the pictograph, like the ancient pictograph, is shin, two teeth, pei, a mouth, and then tet, a basket or to surround. And judgment is important because in Israel, people are going to act or feel a way when judgment has been mishandled, when judgment has not been applied properly, when they are not heard, when they are not seen, when they feel slighted. It begins to affect the nation as a whole. It begins to affect the nation as a whole. People's rights and privileges are attached to judgment, how judgment is properly executed. Okay, so we're going to look at some verses in scripture about who judges, what that judgment should look like, and how it's supposed to be carried out, and it being a permanent fixture within our culture and amongst our people. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I already pulled up a lot of these verses that we're going to look at, but I will read them off to you. So let's start with Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 16. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 16. And it says, and I charge your judges at that time. Well, let's go back. He's making captains over. Let's go back to the beginning. It's important. We need to know what's said. Let's go back to verse 1 just so you guys can get an idea of what Yah is talking about. Context is everything. So it says, these be the words which Moshe spake unto all Israel on this side Jordan in the wilderness, in the plain over against the Red Sea, between Param and Tophel, and Lavan and Hazareth and Dizahab. There are 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir unto Kadesh Barnea. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moshe spoke unto the children of Israel, according to all that Yahuwah had given him in commandment unto them. After he had slain Sihon, the king of the Amorites, which dwelt in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, which dwelt at Ashtaroth in Edrei. On this side Jordan, in the land of Moab, began Moses to declare this law, saying, Yahuwah our Elohim spoke unto us in Horeb, saying, Ye have dwelt long enough in this mount. Turn you and take your journey and go to the mount of the Amorites, and unto all the places nigh thereunto, in the plains, in the hills, and in the valley, and in the south, and by the sea side, to the land of the Canaanites, and unto Lebanon, unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Behold, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which Yahuwah sware unto your fathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Jacob, to give unto them and to their seed after them. And I spake to you at that time, saying, I am not able to bear you myself alone. Yahuwah your Elohim hath multiplied you, and behold, ye are this day as the stars of heaven for multitude. Yahuwah of your fathers make you 1,000 times so many more as ye are, and bless you as he hath promised you. How can I myself alone bear you, bear your cumbrance and your burden and your strife? Here we go. Take you wise men and understanding and known among your tribes, and I will make them rulers over you. And he answered me and said, the thing which thou hast spoken is good for us to do. So I took the chief of your tribes, wise men and known, and made them heads over you, captains over thousands, and captains over hundreds, and captains over fifties, and captains over tens, and officers among your tribes. And I charged your judges at that time, saying, is that word shaphat? Saying, hear the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between every man and his brother, and the stranger that is with him. Ye shall not respect persons in judgment, but ye shall hear the small as well as the great, and ye shall not be afraid of the face of man, for the judgment is Yah's. And the cause that is too hard for you, bring it unto me, and I will hear it. And I commanded you at that time all the things which ye should do. So we understand here that this process of judgment was something that our people understood. Our people knew that matters that were too big for us, or matters that we couldn't handle between ourselves, needed to be handled by someone who was wiser or understood more about the law than we do. And so Yah set this up all the way back in Deuteronomy before we entered into the land to admonish the people that when things arise, go to someone when things seem too hard for you, when you can't seem to understand what to do in those situations. Let's look at Deuteronomy 16 and 8. It's talking about the same exact instance. It's talking about judges. Verse 18, 16, verse 18, judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates. So there's nobody above having judges. There's no group that, oh, we're so smart, we don't need to have judges. No, judges were to be a part of the function of our community. Make thee judges in all thy gates, which Yahuwah Elohim giveth thee throughout thy tribes. Okay. And they shall judge the people with just judgment. Thou shalt not wrest judgment. Thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift, for a gift blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. That which is altogether just shalt thou follow, that thou mayest live and inherit the land which Yahuwah your Elohim giveth thee. Once again, he says, don't be a respecter of persons. So it doesn't matter if it's your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, a rich person, a poor person, a dignitary. The law applies equally throughout Israel. Nobody is above the law, and nobody can run under it and circumvent the system and do what they want. You can't bribe somebody to let you off the hook. Whatever the judgment is should be applied. And once Yah gives the judgment, then that thing is final. And it's also interesting that in situations where it's above man's head, we have Yah to go to. We see that in the situation with David and Bathsheba. The law says that those taken in adultery should be killed. They should die, right? But in the case of David, Yah applies the law in a way that doesn't hurt Israel, but he also causes the sword to be against David's home. And there is death. There is life for life in that situation. So we see and we're learning how the law applies and how it's not just cut and dry, and why there needed to be wise people and not psychopaths or people who are, overly zealous to kill, not just to apply the law and love Israel, but there are those who seek the occasion of death for even Israel because they don't understand how the law has been stayed even in their own lives. All right, let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5. If there be a controversy between men and they come unto judgment, that the judges may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. And it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, that the judge shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face according to his fault by a certain number. 40 stripes may he give him and not exceed, lest if he should exceed and beat him above these many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee. And it goes on to additional law. So you have this here where the judge is also able to figure out what the punishment should be. But you see that Yah is very much for the restoration of the nation. And it's not just punitive judgment, and that punitive judgment being complete death and cut off and, execution of, no return. It's not it. All right. And then last, and I think this is super important and it applies to right now. And then we'll jump right in to where we pick up. But this information is very important to understanding what the position of the judge is and how it helps to alleviate issues like we're going to see today. And verse 25 says, "And thou, Ezra, after the wisdom of your Elohim that is in thine hand, set magistrates and judges, which may judge all the people that are beyond the river, all such as know the laws of Yah." So there's no judgment without the laws of Yah. And then it goes further because, Ezra is during a time of restoration, very similar to our own, where you have people who are coming and we need to make sure as a nation that these people are applying the word according to Yah's law and not according to their own understanding. And so he says, "And teach ye them that know them not." He says, teach the people that don't know the law. "And whosoever will not do the law of Yah and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily upon him, whether it be unto death or to banishment or to confiscation of goods or to imprisonment." And that applies back to, obviously, the how it's laid out in Torah. And you can see here, it is imperative that the ones who are judging know Torah. There's a lot of judgment being passed, I think, even amongst our nation. And people don't know Yah's law. So they think that they're doing something correctly. They think they are applying the law correctly, but they're not, because they're applying it according to the deceits of their own heart. So we say, oh, cut this person off, or, oh, this person's wicked, or, oh, this person does this, or, oh, this person, and we're not judging properly. And then a lot of people sit as the judge, jury, and executioner on a lot of situations, as Absalom did. And we realize that causes a further ripple effect of negativity throughout the kingdom. So we have to be careful as a nation and make sure that as we're passing judgment, or as we are saying what should happen to someone or what should be done, that we're looking according to Torah and not through a slanted view, not through a skewed view, not through a warped view, and not through a traumatized view, but that we're looking at it according to Yah's law and applying that without respect of persons. It's not whether you like a person, that's not why we judge properly, or whether you dislike a person so you judge more harshly. That is not how Yah's law is supposed to be applied. It's supposed to be applied on a case-by-case manner, in a just way, as a reflection of the character of Yah and his heart towards his people. Okay. So when a judge presides, what is he doing? He's ruling over and deciding upon the action of a case. To rule over and dispute wrongdoing. It can be sharp rebuke, or it could be the ability to contain a situation with the mouth and speak to the situation. Okay, so judgment is not always black and white. And by that, I mean, it's not always death and not death. And so a lot of times we see judgment passed in that way. And when it doesn't fit into those categories, and we become lenient on Yah's judgment, and then we stop our mouths from speaking, thus perverting Yah's judgment. In 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 15, we learn that David is a judge in Israel. He is a judge. He's operating under the function of a judge. So let's look at it. 2 Samuel 8 and 15. It says, "And David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people." So that means that when we look at that text at that time, we have David, and he is executing judgment as the king. Certain things are brought to the king, and he's handling these matters. And we've seen him do that on a bunch of occasions that we'll cover also today. We also see that David's sons were judges over Israel. So as we get down to here, verse 18, "And Benaniah and Jehoiada was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief rulers." It means that they were judges in the land. So he understood the checks and balances of the system. No power sits without checks and balances. And that's even true in Israel. Yah has his law, that is the law of the land. And then you have the king, the priest, and the prophet. Those are all a system, kind of like our executive branch, our legislative branch. How our system works together, it's kind of very similar, where no system is able to circumvent one. And then you have Yah, who is king, sits over them all, and then checks every single one of those systems. So when we look in this chapter and these past chapters, we notice that so much is off concerning judgment. Absalom tells Tamar to stay silent, thus perverting judgment. Her issue should have been taken before the judges. Her issue should have been taken before the family. Her issue should have been taken before ones who could speak on what was to happen, because Israel had not seen an act as vile as what happened to her. So that was a situation where it was brought before the judges. We see that with Zelophehad's daughters, where they're like, our father has no sons, so we don't get land. And Moses takes that issue to Yah, and Yah says, no, regarding this issue, this is how this should be carried out. And so it's situations that seem to be above man's head or so painful and, vile. Those issues we take to Yah, and Yah does the judging on those issues. Yah doesn't sit silent on issues, but when we pervert the judgment by staying it or taking it into our own hands, then we don't get the outcome that is going to bring healing and restoration. So that was the first thing where we see the judgment being perverted. Tamar was told to stay silent, my sister, for that is your brother. That was not the proper action in that. That should have been taken to their father. And then if the father didn't know what to do with it, that should have been taken to the priest and the prophet. And Amnon should have been brought before the people, and that should have been dealt with. Okay. All right. David is also angry, but he does not bring accusation. So no one in this situation seems to be trusting the system or the checks and balances that are put into place. These last few chapters have been very difficult to unravel. Flaws and flawed humans trying to unpack the lives of ones much more righteous than ourselves can lead to a padded or comfortable gaze at times toward the inequities of our ancestors. To speak negatively of our patriarchs, especially David, is a difficult reality. We're seeing negative, and it's difficult for us to sit in the seat knowing the complete story and picture of David and to speak to it. So I'm not speaking presumptuously at all concerning what we see. I know the full report, and I know how Yah saw David, but as we look in these issues and we look at the home, we have to look at them in a manner that allows us to not glorify the man, but to see what we're supposed to see, and then know how we're supposed to live and apply truth to our lives and to our community. You and us all, we often see people as anointed, and then we automatically give a pass. And then we don't look into what's actually happening. And then we repeat the mistakes that they have made. And I think we picked this up over time, definitely, and for the modern time, with the church. Church has allowed people and families to excuse people in power who were either exceptional in talent, and we skew the standard at times when we don't understand why things are done a certain way. And we've also been taught not to question or look at what Yah has done, but Yah shows us what he does so that we don't misproperly judge not only our nation, but our leaders and our teachers and our prophets and our preachers. We have to keep the standard according to Yah's standard. We say things, well, Yah's going to judge everyone and take care of it. But sometimes that approach allows hurt and pain and other things to fester in ways that they wouldn't if things were dealt with. We have learned to conceal things or to cover them or to pass them aside and want time to heal them in a lot of ways. But time does not heal all things. What heals all things is Yah's Torah and the proper application of it in all situations. Now, this is not to say that Yah is not in control at all times, because absolutely he is, and he does have the final say. But that does mean with that, and if those of us who are called and those of us who are awakened, we are supposed to look at every action and inaction according to Yah's law. These biblical stories are present to show us how to live and how to handle situations, but even more so, how to deal with the lack of justice that we see in our own communities. A lot of us are out and we're marching about justice that's happening on the outside, about how we're being affected by pagan nations, which have been allowed to rule over us because of our disobedience. But then we pervert judgment in our own communities. And we learned last week that in order for judgment to be properly executed, it has to start within the home. And by judgment, it is the proper application of Torah. David's, what we can see on the surface as his inaction or his misjudgment, and we'll look into that a lot more carefully today, can be seen as problematic. When it comes to issues from the outside, when David has brought something from Nathan, or in the situation like today, when the woman from Tekoa comes before David with her cause, he's able to see it clearly. He sees it clearly, and there's immediate action. But then on the other side, we see hesitation in some areas. And so we need to understand what that hesitation is so that we get a proper perspective, but also so that we can identify when we hesitate to apply judgment or to speak either sharply or to contain an issue within our own gates and within our own community. Well, you see, it is not David's nature to turn his hand against Israel. Although David is a man of war, he struggles with the execution of judgment against Yah's people. And Yah sees him as one like himself because of that. You see, when Hamashiach came, people had issues with him because he did not execute judgment on the enemies of Israel. But what they didn't understand is to execute judgment on the enemies of Israel would first mean that there would have to be judgment brought at home. And the nation was turned upside down. David, at a time much before Hamashiach, saw the nation as one that Yah was restoring. I was reading through Genesis this week, and something jumped out to me that was very arresting in a lot of ways. And I saw that Yah was very patient with us as a people. Yah was one who did not allow us to walk blindly, but even in our trials and traumas, when we're going through Abraham and Jacob and our patriarchs and their wives and decisions they made, they were still circumnavigating and figuring out what Yah's call was on their life. And as they begin to understand Yah more, they begin to walk more closely with him. And you can see that there was change. And there was change. And a lot of times with us, and when I talk about judgment, I'm not talking about this, you guys need to get it right so you don't be judged. I mean, it's part of the narrative, but also part of the narrative of judgment is that Yah is training us. The judgment is to reprove us, to make sure that we're on the right path. And if we never speak to the deviation from the law, then how can we know if we're walking upright and circumspect? And so something stood out to me specifically, and it was when Jacob had his encounter with Yah. He had served Laban. His sons were grown. So many things had happened in his life. And there was a particular point in his life where he was heading back to a land Yah told him to go to. And he tells his sons and the people that are with him, put away your idols, clean yourselves so that we can go to this particular place. And that struck me because I'm like, wow, one, they had idols. One, they had to be told this at this particular time. You have Jacob, he's a patriarch, but there was something about his judgment and the way that he was able to cause the people to clean up their lives and to turn away from their wickedness and to turn toward Yah. That was very, very, very important. It's very important to note because the judgment is applied over and over again, but it is that sharp speaking or that containment for the restoration of the nation. Judgment is not just cut off. Judgment is not just the obliteration of Yah's people. Yah is very much long suffering, and it's something that we see in David. But then there's also the time where we have to speak like Jacob did and cause those and let them know that we see these things that they are doing. And it is high time. It is now time to turn away from those things and to walk upright before Yah. Now, we know that David knows what's right. David has led the nation in various occasions where he has had to rebuke those close to him. When Joab kills Abner, He causes them to rent their clothes and to mourn, and he publicly speaks against what has been done. That's not something that David is not akin to. He understands the proper application of judgment. There seems to be a little bit of leniency, if you will, when it applies to his children. Now, we don't know if this is just leniency or if this is David once again waiting on Yah. So in this case, I'm not passing judgment. We're going to look through the text and see what the overall outcome is. See, David is not ignorant of restitution, but tends to see things in a very warlike way. He sees things as kill or don't kill. But what we know over time, and we've talked about a little bit more, judgment is much more than the execution of judgment against the enemies of Yah, but the speaking against the atrocities that happen within our own walls and gates. You see, in the manner concerning Bathsheba, Yahuwah shows us that his heart is not just toward immediate death, but he offers time for repentance. And even doing that, it didn't come without consequence. There was the prophet who came to speak against what David was doing, to let him know he knew what had happened and to know the outcome of it. We don't necessarily at all see that with the situation with Amnon and Tamar. David does not grab his son and let him know that he knows. It's something that kind of just floats in this area that really makes us all very uncomfortable. You see, Yahuwah's judgment didn't involve death. And so for a lot of people, where we praise Absalom for what he has done, he is still operating amiss. See, Absalom was not correct. Not every situation necessarily requires death, but it definitely requires something to happen. Nothing happen is almost like consenting to something happening. Many people would think that we should just stand back and watch and wait. And what David does is he knows that the sword is upon his house, and he feels, I'm adding conjecture, but it seems to feel like he's powerless because of what he's done and how he's been pardoned, and also how his hand should be against Israel. Maury made a really good statement earlier while we were having a conversation concerning this particular text. And he mentioned that you don't see the leaders of Israel killing Israel. It's when you get a wicked leader over Israel that you see them killing Israel. Moshe, does not execute judgment and just start killing people every time they do something. There are definitely accounts when it happens where the nation comes together, like with the man who gathered sticks on the Shabbat. It's like, man, we just got this commandment. You know how Yah is about his commandments, right? And you're going to just break a simple one. They didn't kill him because he gathered sticks per se. They killed him because of the condition of his heart and how he had decided he was not going to obey Yah's law right after Yah's law is given on a particular manner. We also see the instant execution of those who participated in the golden calf incident, but we don't see the execution of Aaron. Aaron is put into service. So we've learned throughout the process of scripture, and definitely throughout the process of this 1st and 2nd Samuel series, that the application of judgment is not always death, but it sometimes is servitude. Sometimes is bondage. It sometimes is exile. It sometimes is being cut off, and it is death sometimes. So we've seen the law applied in a lot of different ways. David, when the sword is put toward his house, still has the ability to do something about it. You see, when Yah says something or executes something, it's not just to make us afraid, which it does and which it should, but it's to put us on high alert for those things. Because of what you've done, the sword is not going to depart from your house. So how do I need to arrange things or put things in order or speak to things that I'm seeing in order to lessen the house warring against itself or lessen the sword toward the house? Now, it seems as though when we looked at the text, when it opened up with Tamar, that it opened in a way that this thing came like a wave right after another. And so now that is seen, and we're opening up and getting into chapter 14, how David deals and how he applies still directly affects how the sword is going to torment his house. I'm going to give you an end before we get there. So this is a complete spoiler alert. David is learning. I know that's hard for us to look at our patriarchs. It's hard to look at our heroes. It's hard to look at those that we hold in very high esteem as ones who are learning. But as we're looking into areas of their lives and not necessarily looking at the complete picture, they are in the process of learning, and their response to Yah gives us help toward what our response should be. But as a spoiler alert, David realizes that the devourer doesn't just have to devour, and that our repentance and our action, whatever that action is that is necessary for that situation, can help to alleviate the pressure of judgment. A situation happens much later, and we'll get to it in the process of the series, but David numbers the people. And when David numbers the people, Yah becomes angry, and Yah gives him three options. He gives him the options to fall in the hands of his enemies. He gives an option of a plague, and or to fall in the hands of Yah. Okay, so he's like, you're gonna it's gonna be all bad, but let's pick one. And it gets into more detail. So he picks to fall in the hands of Yah. Great decision. At the hands of Yah, though, thousands of people are dying. The angel of Yahuwah is over the people, and people are dying. And David, as we see in, what we're reading now, where he seems to be inactive or passive in his approach to Yah's judgment, David learned something, that if I do something and I set something in motion, it is also my responsibility to then act in a way to relieve the people of my actions, relieve my house of my actions. And so David goes to Ornan's threshing floor, and he purchases the threshing floor, and he begins to sacrifice. And they can literally see the angel of Yahuwah, the Melech of Yahuwah. And he stays the judgment of Yah. Yah's judgment stops, and the people stop dying. And that is actually the place where David builds the temple being the place where we are able to put our sins into remission, if you will, by the sacrifice. He builds this place where it's a permanent structure representing what that space is, a threshing floor where we lay down and allow Yah to tread upon us as a nation and to judge us, so that he can get to that precious part, that usable part. And so this is not David's end. I wanted to put that out there, because when we go into stuff and we discuss people's lives, when it's in a snapshot, and if you walk away from this video, right, and you never pick up the 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel series, you will leave away with the improper view of a man who literally is after Yah's own heart and is a type of the Messiah that we're going to see in the Brit Kadashah. So it's very important that we don't leave with saying, oh, he was inactive, or oh, he didn't do, so that's how he's going to be the rest of his life. That is not David's story, and that is not who he is, but he is learning just as we all are. David asked in Psalm 51 for Yah to, when he cleanse him of blood guiltiness, he said, when you do this, I will teach transgressors your ways. A lot of us don't understand that the process of teaching people not to transgress against Yah, as we all have done, is a process of learning and of leaning into Yah. And sometimes it doesn't look perfect as a person's working out what it looks like to be one who walks upright before Yah and shows people Yah's grace and mercy. And sometimes it requires us to stumble and for our stories to be told and for there to be discipline. But it is putting ourselves in the position, once again, at the threshing floor, where Yah can use us as an example to show that he can knock off all the hard stuff and break off the hard outer coating, and to push away the chaff, and to winnow away all the parts that don't matter, to gather that and burn that, but that there's still something very precious and good at the root of it all. Through reading the Bible, and specifically these stories of our ancestors' lives, I realized that they are figuring out life just as we're figuring it out. I pondered how David was considered a man after Yah's own heart when his inaction seemed passive in attitude. But it was merely just a situation in his journey. You see, David continually pushes through until he gets it right with Yahuwah. And Yahuwah causes him to learn all these lessons. And when he passes to the end of his life, he has reached a point of completion to where Yah can say, good and faithful servant, well done. David finally gets it. David finally understands. And it wasn't just at his death, but it's much before then. He led the nation very righteously. Likewise, we shall too. I am kind of giving the end before the beginning because I know it's difficult to observe these actions without context. But David is one and is a person whose life is highlighted in such a lengthy manner and such a lengthy narrative because we're supposed to see every single part. All right, we will learn today that David is not void of feelings and he is not a terrible person or a bad father, but he's navigating parenting and leadership and the role of a king and a priest and a nation under Yah's law, as we all are and as we all do. All right, so chapter 13 ends with David leaving Absalom in the land of Geshur. This is a judgment of banishment. This is the judgment of banishment. David not going back to retrieve Absalom was pretty much his judgment regarding the matter, but also his protection of Absalom from what would befall him if he returned. So let's look at, and I'm going to pull this up and we'll keep going, but I'm going to show you where this land of Geshur is, and just to give you some context, because last week we didn't really look at where it was. All right, and let's kind of put this here. All right, so this is where Jerusalem is. We're going to hear about Tekoa today. Here's Tekoa near the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. Here is Jericho, and we've heard about Shechem, Ephraim, and then all the way up here, Lodabar, we've heard about that place, Geshur, near the Sea of Galilee. All right, so Absalom flees, right, from Jerusalem to Geshur, and then Joab's route from Jerusalem to Geshur is the same, bringing Absalom back. Little spoiler alert. All right. So Absalom is in the land of Geshur. So Absalom in the previous chapter fled because he felt he had to take justice, right, and judgment into his own hands concerning his sister Tamar. Absalom has a bone to pick, and now he is a threat to the kingdom. We'll see that. So often we leave unresolved issues that fester. They fester. My questions as leading up to this was, okay, Absalom fled because he killed his brother. It was premeditated because of the rape of his sister Tamar and the inaction of everyone around him. He grew up in a system where he understands judgment. He understands the function of the king. He understands what a prophet is. He understands what a priest is, and nobody spoke to this issue. He's going to take it into his own hands. Absalom becomes the manslayer that we see in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. So let's look at that. Okay. And it says, but if any man hate his neighbor and lie in wait for him and rise up against him and smite him mortally that he die, and fleeth into one of these cities. Now, these are the cities of refuge. Then the elders of his city shall send and fetch him thence and deliver him into the hand of the avenger of blood, that he may die. Thine eyes shall not pity him, but thou shalt put away the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, that it may go well with thee. Now, I know it's hard because we all have decided that Amnon should be dead. But the reality is Absalom circumvented the system. Absalom took it into his own hands. He didn't go before a judge. He didn't go before a priest. He created a whole scenario to get him out by himself. So he did not take the proper protocol in order to execute the judgment of taking someone's life. You see, when a life is taken and a person is in their sin, a person is pretty much saying, die and go to hell, die and go to eternal separation. You have cut their life short, and you have not only become the judge for this life, but now he became the judge for the one to come as well. It's a very, very, very heavy seat to sit in. You see, David knew Torah. David knew Torah. And he understood the law of the kinsman avenger. And he knew anyone who took the role could lawfully also kill Absalom. Absalom could not flee to a city of refuge after killing Amnon because the law would require him to be sent back to the avenger. Absalom fled to a territory outside would be, outside of Yah's law, outside of the jurisdiction of the king, what he thinks is the jurisdiction of the king, and outside of the borders of Israel. See, you see, Absalom knew he was wrong. He feels justified, but overall he ran because he knows that there are also certain protocols set in place and that he crossed or went over this protocol. All right, now we can open up and look at for 2 Samuel chapter 14. I know that was a lot, but we cannot ever begin without knowing what happened, where it's happening, who it's happening to, and how these things apply. Because our brains, as we're reading the Bible, are constantly being shaped by what we read. And if we don't know what's happening, then we will, like I mentioned in the beginning, make improper judgment. Nobody wants to be in the seat of a judge. I wouldn't want to be in the seat of the judge on the issue of Amnon and Tamar. I wouldn't want to be in the seat of the judge on the issue of Absalom and Amnon. I wouldn't want to be in the seat of judgment on David and Bathsheba and Uriah. But we have to make sure that we know what's happening because we are all passing judgments all the time. We learn over a process of time. I've learned over a process of time not to sit in a seat of judgment. But the reality is we all do, and we have done it with this text. And so it was important to put those things back into their proper perspective. The seat of a judge is not an easy seat to sit in. It's not, especially when it involves your own. All right, opens up with now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. I don't know if we covered this before. I mentioned it earlier this week. I was like, I think we did. I'm sure we did. I don't know 100% if we did, but if we didn't, we will. Who is Zeruiah? How do we open up? Why does this matter? This matters because what we're getting ready to see is family business. See, everything that's happening right now and everything that's been happening is family business. And it opens up and it gives Joab this title because it kind of gives us kind of the working parts and the working people a part of what's going to happen to come. Now, Joab, the son of Zeruiah, I don't know if anybody knows this, but Zeruiah is David's sister. That's 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. Okay. Zeruiah is David's sister. Joab is David's nephew. Joab is David's nephew. Okay. So this is not this person who's just like the captain of the army and he really has this strong affinity toward this young man, Absalom. No, this is actually Joab's first cousin. They grew up together. Their parents are siblings. Okay. It's important to note. It's very important. All right. So you have Joab, the son of Zeruiah, who perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. The word here is yada. It's not just the idea of, I have this slight feeling over here. No, it's to watch and to know. He's watching and he knows. He knows that David's heart has been toward Absalom. He knew it even before. It said he sought to go to his son, right? But he let the time pass and he was like, you know what? I'm not feeling it. I'm not being told to move in that direction. Amnon is gone. Absalom is, in Gesher. He's fine. Let's just heal. Everybody, let's just heal. And he said he was comforted concerning that. He was complete in his understanding and how he felt about that. All right. So the family has been hit hard by what has happened to Tamar and then what has happened to Amnon and also by Absalom being gone. If you ever had a cousin, if you ever had family and you guys get separated or something happens and it affects everybody. That's my cousin, I haven't seen him in a long time, or this happened, and we tend to want things to go back to normal. So Joab knows what it feels like. See, Joab has a little affinity toward Absalom. Why? Well, that's his cousin, but he knows what it feels like for the king to not handle a matter. See, he thought the king should have handled Abishai and Asahel, the situation with Abner, and we all went to battle. He thought that should have been handled differently. And because he thought it should be handled differently, he took it into his own hands and he killed Abner. So he has a little thing like, man, I remember when, my brother died, and king, like, man, he invited this dude, kill my brother, down and made a treaty with him. And he put Israel before, like, my feelings. And I remember how that made me feel, but it probably took him time to kind of understand. So he's sitting back and he's pondering. He's like, I feel something. When people go through things that are similar to ours, we kind of like feel something toward those people. Joab had to feel something toward Absalom. And he knows how David felt toward him. David didn't banish Abner. Banish Joab. But he did openly and publicly rebuke what he did. He did do that. So when we think back to 2 Samuel, David's nephew dies at the hand of Abner. So Joab's brother was not just some regular person. And you had to think that maybe his sister felt some type of way too. Like, you're not going to go get the guy who killed my son. I'm your sister. Like, what are you going to do about that? And David operates in a way that is always for the better of Israel, even above family, even above himself, even above his own household. He does that. He understands that my personal qualms, whether it was between him and Saul, can't come in and make me operate in a way that perverts what Yah would want in this particular situation. See, Job knows all too well that the ways of David are not the ways of the average man, but that he loves his son, but doesn't want to set a precedent in Israel. So what a precedent is, it means that if I allow this particular thing to happen, if I don't do something or don't say something or do or say something about this, it becomes rule. It becomes a judgment that will then be passed on. So in law, that happens. We call these precedenting cases: Brown versus Board of Education, Roe versus Wade. These are cases that now when people go back to try to fight and overturn certain things, they're going to say, well, remember how the court judged on this particular issue, and that's how we're going to apply judgment moving forward. David tries to the best of his ability to not create situations of precedence within Israel. But what happens in this particular situation is that his inaction or his not applying judgment to the situation also applies or presents a precedent to Israel. It means that when this happens, it doesn't say that he was okay with it. It doesn't say it can happen, but it leaves a people in a position like, well, what if that was my son? And what if that was my daughter? What if my son killed my daughter? And so that is what the rest of this text is. It's David being, in a lot of ways, coerced or tricked into passing a judgment on the situation that has taken place. All right, so it says, verse 2, and Joab sent to Tekoa. Tekoa, we saw it on our map. He sent to Tekoa, and he fetched a wise woman. So she wasn't just any woman. She's a woman of wisdom, somebody. And I'll say this, I've been saying this all week. People don't get to term themselves things in Israel. So you can say, I'm the teacher. I'm the more, I'm the morah, I'm the this. No. The nation sees the anointing that Yah has put on a person. They're tried in that particular function, and then they're termed that. So nobody's called wise just because she's like, I'm wise, I'm a prophetess, I'm a prophet, I'm a teacher. No. She has had to have shown herself wise. Okay. So we have to make sure we keep that in mind. It wasn't like, let's go find a wise woman. Do people say you wise, sis? No, she had already been wise. Okay. In the land. Just want to note that. So he found a wise woman and fetched her from Tekoa and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, and put on now mourning apparel, and anoint thyself with oil, but be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead. So now he's like, all right, I need you to do something. We have to work out this thing with the king because people are upset by what's happening. It's been a few years, judgment hasn't been passed, and this is not looking good. Okay, we have to do something. How they choose to do it, well, it's here. It's here. And so, and come to the king and speak on this manner unto him. So Joab gets the woman, and Joab tells the woman what to say. The words of Joab are a reflection of the feelings of the nation and the family. These are not his own words. He's heard the buzz. He's been in conversations. He's gone to his mama's house. He's talked to his uncles. He's talked to his cousins. He's talked to his brothers, and it's buzzing. It's just like undercurrent thing. And he's just like, okay, we got to stop this because this is getting out of hand. Now people over here talking about they want to kill Absalom. They're going to go get him from Geshur. Just conjecture. And the people over here like David's not doing his job right. Maybe we need a new king. Is David losing it? And then you got, Tamar over here, still a present individual in all of this. And now she's lost her brother. And it's just like, it's an issue. He's like, we have to do something. See, he assessed the situation concerning Absalom. And his main concern, and we'll see this in a little bit, is that Absalom is going to become a threat to Israel. See, he's not just mad at David for not passing judgment. He's mad at everyone who sat back and allowed this to happen, and everyone who has now allowed him to stay banished. Like, there's something festering. And Joab is like, I know how dudes get. When you say something and they take it wrong, and then they think they're put out or they're banished, and so they stay gone and they don't come back, and there's no restitution. They begin to get slithery and they begin to act a certain way. And he's like, we have to do something about this. So he's like, this young man is angry. He's becoming more bitter by the day and has now gone to live in another nation or another household. Absalom has the potential of severely affecting and dividing the kingdom because his reason for killing Amnon would cause most people to feel some type of way. And he is powerful enough and is willing to kill if necessary. He's not just a little boy anymore. He's not just a young man. All right. So this is the thing. He sets a little trap. And so this woman goes, we'll read her story. And the woman of Tekoa spake to the king. So Joab put the words in her mouth. He said, come to the king and speak on this manner unto him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. So as we hear the woman speaking, just know that this is what Joab told her to say, not making things up on her own. And when the woman of Tekoa spake to the king, she fell down on her face to the ground and did obeisance and said, help, O king. And the king said unto her, what aileth thee? And she answered, I am indeed a widow woman, and mine husband is dead. So first things first, culture and context. Why does she go as a widow woman? Well, if she had a husband, then her husband should judge on the matter between his two sons, right? So she immediately pulls the king into the matter because clearly her issue hasn't been judged upon properly, her issue. So she pulls him in because now he can preside and make judgment over it because she's a widow woman, and the widows and the orphans fall under the care of the whole community of Israel. They have obviously family, but if she's widowed and nobody has made a levirate vow, it means that she must be a older, wiser woman who has children. She probably is more than likely beyond childbearing age or chose to stay a widow. And these are two of her older sons who have gotten into it. And now there's this call for what she is saying is restitution. So she says, and thy handmaid had two sons, and they strove together in the field, and there was none to part them. She's laying it down. She's giving the case. But the one smote the other and slew him. And behold, the whole family is arisen against thine handmaiden. And they said, delivered him that smote his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he slew. Conversation, right? Brother slays a brother. And she's like, everybody's against me because my son has killed my other son. They're asking me to bring him back so that they can kill him. Believe you me, this is a conversation that has probably happened between Amnon's mother's family, right? Whoever lives in Israel that is a part of this, Amnon's brothers who don't agree with what Absalom has done. He's saying, the lady is saying, they want me to bring my son to have him killed. And so David's like, you're listening, right? But it's striking a chord. It's striking a chord, and Joab set it up this way so that it would strike the chord. And they said, so deliver him that smote his brother, that we may slay him for the life of his brother whom he slew, right? The kinsman avenger. And we will destroy the heir also. So we also know, and she's saying, in the heir. So this strikes a chord, like, yes, Absalom is also an heir to the throne. And so they shall quench my coal, which is left. She's like, he's all I have left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth. So she's saying they're going to leave me destitute. I'm already a widow, and I'm not going to have a son, and my husband will have no more seed on the earth. And the king said unto the woman, this King David, go to your house, and I will give charge concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said unto the king, my master, O king, the iniquity be on me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. So he was saying, let me think about it. Go home, and then I'll send what my judgment is concerning this. Because he's like, I gotta think about this. I can't think about it through my own lens. So when he judges, you've seen it when Nathan came to him with the scenario that Yah gave concerning the ewe lamb, right? He's like immediately like, this is what should be done, right? But he does it not thinking of himself, because if he would have thought about himself, he would have thought about the fact that was him. In the same situation, he's like, okay, I can't filter my judgment through my own personal trauma. Let me think about it. She's like, no. Judge, and if there's inequity, let it fall on me, but you'll be guiltless. Like, let me hear what you have to say. And the king said, whosoever saith aught unto thee, bring him to me, and he shall not touch thee anymore. All right. So she's like, okay. He's like, he still hasn't passed judgment on that particular issue. He's like, don't worry about it. If the people are doing that, tell those people to come to me, and I'll deal with those people individually, but nobody's going to touch you. Nobody's going to harm you. And then she said, I pray thee, let the king remember Yahuwah your Elohim, that thou wouldest not suffer the revenge of blood to destroy anymore, lest they destroy my son. He's like, Joab has her driving it. Like, you got to get him to say this. Okay. And so he understands that. So he's like, oh, okay. It's not. And he's thinking back in his head. Now, let me tell you why this is very important. I told you I went through Genesis recently this week. When Jacob and Esau are Jacob gets the blessing. When Isaac is getting ready to bless Esau, and Rebecca has Jacob come to Isaac as Esau, and Isaac blesses Jacob, who is disguised as Esau, instead of Esau, that blessing sticks. See, the word of our word, period, but our ancestors, our patriarchs understood their word to be very, very powerful. Don't just speak flippantly. We don't just speak flagrantly. It's very careful, because the judgment I make now becomes a precedent. If Isaac would have said, oh boy, you pretending to be Esau when Esau came, you don't get the blessing. It was for him. It sets a precedent. You can bless a kid and then take the blessing back. You can say something and then you can go back on your word. That wasn't proper in our culture. So what happens is that blessing sticks on Jacob. Not only did he get his birthright that Esau sold for soup, but he also gets his firstborn right. Like, he gets all of it. He gets everything. And, Esau saying, like, why didn't you bless me? Don't you have something left? Say something. He's like, I can't say nothing. I gave it away. He's like, your mouth can't say another blessing. You just said this one. He's like, this is what has happened. This is what it is. Same thing is here. The reason why David is being careful with his words is because what he says is going to stick. What he says is king, what he judges to this lady, like, judgments were not secret. Judgments were not a respecter of person. What applied in this situation would now become a precedent in Israel. So she tells him, the avengers of blood are going to be after my son. It's not about just me, people coming to you. Like, what the law is. Say something regarding this. Help me, judge me on this matter, right? And he said, as Yahuwah liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth. He makes a judgment. He swears by Yah. He judges by Yah and says, there is not one hair of your son that shall fall into the earth. Now, the judgment was supposed to be about her, remember? But Joab, they had all conjured up and conspired and got together, and this is what they're trying to get David to judge on Absalom. Then the woman said, let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one word unto my master the king. And he said, say on. It's another instance as well where we see an interaction between a male, non-relative male. I mean, she's from Judah, from the territory, but this is not somebody's like, oh, this is his mom or his aunt or somebody. You see this interaction and you see a respectful exchange between the two. He's not talking down to her. He actually cares about her matter. He's hearing her out and he wants to pass proper judgment and protect her as a daughter of Zion. Okay, it's very important to note. So she asks, could she say something else? You know, she is following the proper protocol. You don't just pop off at the mouth. She asked, can I add something else? Go ahead, say on. And the woman said, wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of Yah? So now she's like, for the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty, and that the king doth not fetch home again his banished. So she said, okay, so now she comes with the second part of it. So he judges and he says, and she pushes him, he pushes him. He's like, nothing's gonna happen to your son. Nobody's gonna touch his son. She's like, okay, so why couldn't you pass the same judgment for your own son? That's what Joab and everybody wants to know, right? If you're afraid of the avengers of blood and you think that people are going to come against your son, which he very much well did and should, then why didn't you say the same thing about your own? He says, and why have you, she says, wherefore hast thou thought such a thing against the people of Yah? Like, what is that? Like what is he doing against the people of Yah? It's going to come out in just a second. So she says, for we must needs die and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither does Yah respect any person, yet doth he devise means that his banished be not expelled from him. He's like, oh, you're not judging. You're not judging. And because you're not judging, you're being a respecter of persons, and it's causing all this other stuff, right? So she comes to him and she talks about, for we must needs die. What she's saying is what Joab had perceived is Absalom's dangerous. And if you don't bring him back home, you're going to cause something and death amongst all of Israel. Now, do we know this to be true 100%? But maybe he already killed one son and you've left him away banished, and now the people are becoming restless. One of the most important things to David and why he didn't pass judgment in the way that we felt like he should concerning Abner and other things is because his job and his role was to make Israel one. The issue with Saul and himself, Saul being upset with him, had torn the nation apart. The nation was divided. The nation was set at aught against one another. And David had finally, through the work of Yahuwah, brought the nation together. And these rifts and what has happened is slowly unraveling the fabric of the nation. And it's going to cause a split if something is not done. These are the thoughts of the people. Okay. And so she says, you have not brought back your own banished. Now, therefore, that I am come to speak of this thing unto my master, the king, it is because the people have made me afraid. Now it comes to it. She has been set up to do. They're like, you go. She's like, I actually really am afraid because they have told me that I have to go and I have to do this particular thing. Okay. It may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaid. For the king will hear to deliver his handmaid out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of Yah. So she's like, I have a son. And yeah, my whole life is on the line. That's why I did this. So please don't put this on me. This is why I've said this and I've been set up to say this because I know she's probably like, oh, I'm about to say this to the king. She probably thought through her head 50 million times. This is not a conversation that I want to have with David, but she had been handpicked and chosen to do this particular task. Verse 17, then thine handmaiden said, the word of my master the king shall now be comfortable. For as an angel of Yah, so is my master the king to discern good and bad. Therefore, Yahuwah, thy Elohim, will be with thee. Then the king answered and said unto the woman, okay, let me ask you something, and don't lie to me. The thing that you asked me about, about this thing. And the woman said, okay, let my master the king now speak. And the king said, is this not of the hand of Joab? And has he not told you to say all this? Is he not with you in all this? And the woman answered and said, as thy soul liveth, my master the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left from aught that my master the king has spoken. For your servant Joab, he got me, he bade me, and he put all these words in the mouth of your handmaid. To fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing, and my master is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel or messenger of Yah, to know all things that are in the earth. And the king said unto Joab, so he goes, king goes to Joab after all this is over, and he says, behold, now I have done this thing, like you got me to say it. Go therefore and bring the young man Absalom again. He's like, okay, I get it. I see what you guys did here. All right, pass judgment. Go get him. Go get Absalom. My word is my word. I said what I said. Go get him. Okay. So now David sends for Absalom, and he instructs Joab. He said, now you go get him. You want him? You go get him. So let's see what happens with Absalom when he gets back. So Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my master, O king, and that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. Now, granted, obviously this had been a conversation before, because he knew once he's thought about it, he's like, this is Joab. Joab has done all this. So it had to have been at some point or another. And then Joab says, thank you for hearing my request and, hearing the request of your servant. And so he said, O king, he said, today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my master, O king, and that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. See, Absalom returns to Jerusalem, but David refuses to see him. It gets a little difficult, but track, okay? Follow along. David struggles with sending the wrong message to Israel. He knows he's made the judgment. He knows his word is bond. He said what he said, but he's like, okay, be careful. I have to be careful because there's a split here. Some people feel one way and some people feel the other way. And I still, even in my judgment, have to sit neutral in a lot of ways as king over the nation. I can't be a respecter of person. I can't just bring my son back and then people are somehow going to feel like judgment doesn't apply to my own. Okay. See, David struggles with sending the wrong message. David's word has bound him because he made the judgment, and a judgment that is made by a king or a judge sets a precedence. Now, David was coerced to passing the judgment and bringing his son home, but nevertheless, the judgment was passed. Absalom sits in a weird place with David because Absalom circumvented the king and the law in killing his brother Amnon. He didn't think that his father was acting fast enough, or that his father was acting in wisdom and took things into his own hands. So he has ill feelings, right? And he further fractures the family beyond that which happens to Tamar. It didn't heal it. It didn't make anything better. And it caused an uproar in the king's house, and it trickled into the kingdom. Okay, so you can see why David is like, don't bring him to see my face, because I don't want people to get the wrong idea about how I feel, one, about what happened to Tamar, what happened to Amnon, what happened in all the situation. And he's treading lightly. He's treading lightly. And so it says, so Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. But in all Israel, there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot, even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. So not only was he back in the land, but Absalom is beautiful. Absalom is not only people are often respecters of persons. They look on the outside. So they're like, okay, now they're being wooed by him. Like, well, dang, he is the king's son. And ooh, he sure is fine. And so the people are also swaying a little bit because of Absalom. And, people tend to forget things over time. And it said that he was beautiful from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. There was no blemish in him. He was perfect. And when he pulled his head, right, and the word here for pulled is galach. It means to shave off or to shave. When he pulled his head, for it was at every year's end that he pulled it. So his hair grew like this in 1 year. Because the hair was heavy on him, therefore he pulled it. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels, which is about almost 5 pounds of hair after the king's weight. And unto Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter. And his daughter was named, her name was Tamar. We talked about this last week just briefly, but Absalom names his daughter Tamar because the life of his sister was stolen. Like it killed her, not physically, but it cut her off from her life and the life that she was supposed to live. And so he does something honorable, like he loves his sister. And so he names his daughter after her. That means that this thing for Absalom was deep. Like, wasn't just this surface thing, like this happened to my sister and I love it. No, this is like deep. Like her life has been taken. And you can tell by this, he feels like there needs to be restitution for what has happened to her. And so because it hasn't happened, he then again goes and he honors his sister in naming his daughter after her aunt. And it says, and she was a woman of fair countenance. She was also beautiful like her aunt. And so verse 28, so Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem and saw not the king's face. 2 years go by. You're in the land and the king has not seen you. You have not seen him. He's just like, you stay in your area, I stay in mine. You've not been called to the king. Therefore, Absalom sent to Joab to have him sent to the king. Joab, I need you to send me to the king. But Joab wouldn't come to him. He sent again a second time, and Joab didn't come again. Therefore, he said unto his servants, see, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there. Go set it on fire. See, Absalom has an issue. And I know a few people like this. He has, an entitlement issue. He's like, when I call and when I say and when I tell people to do, this is what they should do. I think I know how people should do things. So if people don't do things like I think they should be done, I take them into my own hands. Unfortunate. Very unfortunate. Because it shows a disposition of his heart. See, he called to Joab. Joab didn't come. He called for him again. Joab didn't come again. And Absalom lost his stuff. Completely lost. He's like, go set his field on fire. You're going to come to me. You're going to respond to me. When I talk to you and when I say I need to talk to you, this is what you're going to do, or I'm going to set fires. I know an Hebrew like that. We had an Hebrew live in our house for a little bit like that, where we went and talked to him about something personal. It wasn't even none of his business. And not that he set fire to anything in the physical, but he started a lot of fires throughout Israel about what he perceived should have been done. And then followed after another peculiar individual in setting fires because of what they thought should be done. See, you have to be careful because people can think that they're operating in their own right, in righteousness by doing something, and they're not really doing what Yah is saying because you don't meet or answer them when they want to be answered. You don't handle something how they want to handled, or you don't respond the way they want to be responded to. Then they begin to set things ablaze because they want the outcome that they want, not knowing everything that's going on behind. And sometimes it is the silence of people to really see what that person's intention really is. Or granted, people are just busy and they have other things going on. But because you're so full of yourself and you're so full of when you should be responded to and how you should have things carried out, you don't wait on Yah and you take judgment into your own hands, thus putting your own head and your own neck in the gallows of Yah's judgment. All right, so he calls for Joab. Joab doesn't come, and he sets Joab's field on fire. See, Absalom only wanted to be brought back really on his own terms. He had a fanatical idea of what it was going to mean to be reconciled back to the people and back to Israel, back to Jerusalem. See, Absalom wanted to be justified for killing Amnon. He's like, I need this to be made right. And of course, he hears the buzzing and he sees how people, I mean, you know how people are. Somebody comes back into the land. Hey, that's Absalom. You remember him? Like, I'm not a good brother. You know, the whispering in the back. And there's this undercurrent thing going on. And you started this stuff. And now you just want it to be over. And part of it being over is I need my dad to justify me. I need him to judge on this. And so here's that tug on David again. Judge on this. Say something, do something, do something, do something. Constantly being pulled. And he's just like, I'm trying to do everything right. That I know to do right, that I'm trying to fix things and but it seems like it's escaping through my hands. This is the process of that sword and that division happening. When things are divided, it's hard to keep up with the parts. See, Absalom wants things done his way, and he'll go about even sinning to do it. Yah is not pleased with outcomes achieved in sin. Yah is not pleased when we want judgment passed on another person that we lie on them. Yah is not pleased when we want something done that we skew the information and skew or pervert the judgment to get the outcome we want. Yah is not pleased with that. Yah is not sitting back like, well, you know what? Whether that person was right or wrong, or whether I was right or wrong, that person, it was time for them to get theirs. And that's not how Yah's judgment works. I had a person tell me that about myself. I lied. Okay. If I lied or because I lied, that was Yah anyways. Really? That's how that works. Okay. No, that's not how it works. That's not how Yah's judgment works. That's not how Yah's system works. We don't get to be the judge, jury, and execution. If we want to bring accusation against someone, if we want to have an audience with someone, if we want our case to be held, there are checks and balances to it. If we're bringing accusation against a person, there is a way to go about doing it. And in this instance, we see something here. Absalom has a spirit that a lot of Hebrews have. They have this strong incline toward by any means necessary, I'm going to get the outcome that I want. I'm going to be heard. I'm going to be justified. I'm going to have vengeance. And in the process of doing so, they circumvent Yah's system, causing trouble. So what does Joab do after Absalom, his cousin, sets his field on fire? So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom unto his house and said unto him, man, why'd you have your servant set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, I sent for you, and I said to come here so that I can see the king. And I want to ask, why did you bring me up from Geshur? He says, so I need to ask this question. So your field got to get set on fire. And a lot of times when people do stuff, it's so they can get to somebody else. He sets Joab's field on fire. He starts a fire. If you want to put it into context, you set a fire amongst the nation so you can get somebody's attention, so that you can get what you want out of something. So he sets the fire and he tells him, I sent to you because I need you to tell this person to do this. He's like, it wasn't even about me and you didn't set my field on fire. How am I going to get somebody to do something? He's like, all right. So he says, it had been good for me to have been there still. Like, why did you bring me up? I would rather be there anyways. What was the point? I waited 2 years. See, Amnon he's a ticking time bomb. He got about a 2-year span before he blows his gasket. He's long suffering that way. He waited 2 years before he killed Amnon. He waited 2 years before he burnt up Joab's field. Like he has like a time limit. He's like, all right, 2 years is good. I can wait 2 years. And after 2 years, I'm going ham on everybody and anyone in my way. So he said, now, therefore, let me see the king's face. And if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. Now he knows the king is not going to kill him. If he was going to kill him, he would have killed him already, right? But he's coming before the king's face because he wants the justification. If I'm wrong, then let him come to me and tell me I'm wrong. If that person don't say I'm wrong, then I guess I'm not wrong. That's not what that means. Just because somebody didn't say something to you when you're wrong. When we were growing up, me and my sister, and we have chores, just like all kids have chores. And she was always slack on doing her chores. Oh, it drove me crazy. And to the point that my mom would come home, and if it was her day to do the dishes, would see the dish in the sink, walk through the kitchen, go about her day, do her whole day, not say anything. And I'd be like, hey, Nuna, you gonna do the dishes? Mom saw it. She didn't say nothing. I'll do it when I'm ready. Okay. Then you get tired, night comes, and you hang out and you fall asleep. Well, you know what happened when you fall asleep in a Hebrew home and you left some chores undone. I don't even put my mom out like that. But just because somebody doesn't do something or say something exactly when you think they should say it, doesn't mean they're giving you a pass and doesn't mean they're justifying your actions. Sometimes Yah has people hold their tongue because if they say something, it'll be to your damnation. It'll be a judgment on you. It'll be their word being passed, and now that thing may have to come to be. So we got to be careful on how we want people to speak and how soon we want them to speak and what we want them to say, because what they may say may not be what you want to hear, may not be the outcome that you were looking for, or you may not be ready to hear what they have to say. All right. So he says, if there be any iniquity in me, like if I did something wrong, tell him to kill me then. Like he's really standing on what he did. He's like, it is what it is. I did what I did. So Joab, verse 33, came to the king and told him what, Absalom said. In my mind, the conversation went a little bit like this. Joab went to David and he told him, he said, remember what I told you about Absalom? It's about to be all bad. You got to do something. Like he's getting ready. He's in that place again. He is what we call insolent pride, wrathful pride. He is lifted up. He believes that he is right and he is going to act in it, and he will skew the story in whatever manner necessary to be justified for his actions. He is insolent. He is in wrathful, insolent pride. And he said, in my mind, that bad that we thought was going to come, well, it's here and we need to get in front of it. Now we have to get in front of it. We have to be proactive, because if we don't, our worst fears concerning Absalom's anger are going to come to pass. So David's like, oh man, I just left him in Gesher. So this is what happens. He gets his way. It's very unfortunate because sometimes when we give people their way, it doesn't always end like we think it is. We're like, you know what, let me give this person an audience. Let me hear what they have to say. Let me hear them out. Even though I don't agree, let me hear them out. And when we put ourselves back in proximity to these people, people begin to have conversations, and then internal conjecture happens behind why they were talking. Well, then they must be cool. Well, then that person must have been right. Well, then that person must have apologized because they're right. And then this person's like, I'm not doing nothing unless I am seen without iniquity. They didn't kill me, so I must be right. They didn't blast me, so I must be right. They didn't put my name out there. They didn't share it. So then they must be convicted. That does not have anything to do with what's happening. Sometimes us Hebrews are saying, whew, that person is real crazy. Let's calm this crazy so we can move on with our life. Let's let this crazy pass so we can move on with our life. Let's let this insolent, ignorant Hebrew have their 5 minutes so we can move on and do Yah's business. Sometimes that is that space. It's not always the best decision, but when Yah tells you to sit in that space, that's a space you have to sit in. And for David, he doesn't seem to have clear direction on things. And so people are taking advantage of the fact that he does not have clear direction, whether it's him not seeing clearly or not having clear direction. You be the judge of that. But what he is doing is trying to do what's best for Israel. And now he has let a wolf in amongst the sheep. But he's so fine, don't nobody know yet. So David goes on and he told him, so Joab comes to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, Absalom comes to the king. Absalom bows himself with his face to the ground. I know it's striking a chord with me, trying to not to take it personal. Do you have people like that? They're all hot air outside where you can't see them. And then when they come in your face, it's a completely different story. So he's before the king and he's doing this false humility and he's bowing before the king and he comes down. And then what happens next? And the king kissed Absalom. Absalom outwardly is submitting to his father, to the king. But David's 2-year refusal you can already see it. It ticked Absalom all the way off to the point that he burned up Joab's field. He's not over it now the king has called him. This guy is not a guy that easily gets over things. That's not his personality. That's not his characteristic at all. He is boiling inside. And Absalom's bitter turns out badly. It's just a little foreshadowing for Absalom, for David, and for Israel. It goes all bad after this. Then the king kissed Absalom. See, David offered Absalom forgiveness without repentance or restitution or any resolution for anything. It's all this, formality, but with no open judgment, with no open rebuke, with no conversation. It's a kiss. What does this kiss mean? This kiss jumped off this page huge because one, in our culture, we talked about this earlier here at the house, we don't kiss in greeting. Maybe women do more so, but men, it's not a thing. But in the Near East culture, and you see it amongst, like you said, Italians and others, you have this kissing or this greeting that can mean a bunch of things. You can get the kiss of death, right? We see that with Yahushua and Judas, right? He points him out with a kiss. You have the kiss of greeting. And then you have here the kiss of equipping or arming someone. It's the same word for kiss, but the context of it, this kiss does something. This kiss means something. This interaction between David and Absalom, it tells a bigger story. David kissing Absalom armed him to do harm. It prepared the way for future insurrection and gave him the authority to move forward in a way that is very much looks like he has the approval of the king. This kiss becomes a sword in itself and becomes divisive. The Hebrew word for this is nashak. Nashak. So I'll click it here. It's a Hebrew word, nashak. Here as it sits in this definition, it means like to literally to kiss or to fasten together or to arrange in order. It means a touching in love or in battle with weapons. So we talk about like when the swords kissed. It's like the initial exchange of a particular situation. This kiss began a war. It began a war. It began a division. See, in personal relationships, it is often a sign of graciousness and love to overlook wrong. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 12 says, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. But as parents, as community, as leadership, and in this case, as with David as a king, Israel and proper judgment is more important than that which is personal. See, David was chief judge of Israel, and David's actions to pacify the anger and pain put the past behind the nation were not sufficient. It wasn't enough to just bring Absalom with no judgment, with nothing. See, too many things were set into motion at this time. To just spoil it a little further, what I mean by it started a bunch. Absalom is getting ready to rise up against David. Divide Israel. The people are going to love Absalom. They're going to choose Absalom over David, and Absalom is getting ready to wreak havoc amongst the nation. He's going to divide Israel. He's going to steal the hearts of the people. He's going to come as a crowned prince who understands. I understand your issues. I understand that my dad doesn't hear. I understand the king is busy. He left me for 2 years now. He's going to come in that way, the same way that the adversary, which is interesting, comes toward us. When we think Yah doesn't hear and Yah's not acting in the way that we should do, then the adversary starts talking. Well, maybe he's telling you to do it your way. You know, Yah not speaking could be his way of saying it's okay. And then we begin to tune into this voice and then we act on it. And then it puts us under further judgment from Yah, where Yah's trying to show us something. Yah's trying to teach us a lesson. And then you have this outside side conversation happen, leading you to then find a way to attack not only Yah's anointed, but in attacking Yah's anointed, you attack all of Israel. So in Absalom coming up against David, he's going to come up against everything that Yah has set in place. If Yah wanted David off the throne, he would have killed him behind the issue with Uriah. Clearly, there was something that Yah was working out, and people have to learn to be patient. Have to learn the process of patience. If you have not watched that video that I put out, that one is important for something like this. Learn that there's steps in things. Learn that there's a process to coming around. Learn that we have to wait to see the outcome to determine whether the fruit is good or bad, whether it's bitter or sweet, whether the tree should be hewn down and cast in the fire, or whether we should add fertilizer to then further restore that particular bearing fruit tree or whatever it is, or that person, to be more specific. See, David did not have to kill Absalom. That's not what anybody's asking David to do. He had already passed the judgment. He wasn't going to kill him, but a rebuke from a father goes a long way. He could have revealed Absalom's heart and intentions in his exchange between him, in that conversation, in that space where they're brought together and everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen, and it ends in a kiss. Sometimes we don't say because we fear the repercussions or actions of another, of what the person on the other end is going to do or say, not realizing that their response reveals their heart. See, we don't have conversations, and I'm guilty of this. You don't have conversations with people, and you don't hold space for them to air out their grievances because you know that they're inherently amiss in their observation or in their conclusion behind a matter. So we don't, but in not giving them an audience and not allowing them to have the conversation, we allow things to fester, where if we would have just heard it right out in that moment, we could have heard what they could have said and set them straight, and then would be able to say, we already talked about this. This has already been dealt with. But when we allow things to fester and linger, it becomes a greater issue. And especially when we kiss or give them or equip them in ways or arm them, not only against the nation, but against us. When we don't deal with issues, we equip them to then be a ambassador for our exchange, an ambassador for our communication. Now they can go out and speak and say, well, they didn't, so this must be what they mean. And they begin to be able to speak in ways and handle themselves in ways that then makes them look righteous and makes the person on the other side look wicked, because that's what they want all along, to be told that you are justified and that you have no iniquity in you. If you think you don't have any iniquity behind killing someone, something wrong. You don't think you have iniquity behind assaulting a person's character. You're wrong. Because to do that means that you then, by what standard we do not know, made yourself to be blameless. But the good thing is, Yah has equipped a righteous one, not us. Not that we don't judge and we don't look to speaking to and keeping our community and our nation together as one, but Yah has for himself a judge. And this son, he says, we shall kiss and equip him with vengeance, which is coming for those who choose to execute judgment outside of Yah's system. Let's end with Psalm chapter 2. It says, why doth, and let me share my screen so we can read this together. I don't want anybody to think I made something up or added to it on my own. All right. It says, why doth the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahuwah and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. Yahuwah shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. Yahuwah hath said unto me, thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve Yahuwah with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. I hope we understand something today about Yah's judgment, who executes the judgment, who he has set in place to execute the judgment in these last days, and how we have to be careful not to pervert Yah's judgment and take things into our own hands, I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your Shabbat. If you have not already, go over to Patreon and check out the resources that we have available for everyone. There's some things we post, write-ups that we do during the week that are available for the general public. And if you would like to sign up, we have a bunch of cool things on Patreon. And of course, if you would like to support the ministry and the work that is being done here by Royal Roots, Her Royal Roots, and our collective team, you can do so by either Cash App in the place below or through our websites. We hope that this information goes deep into your hearts and causes us to walk and live more upright before Abba Yah. Shabbat Shalom.